thanks, Robbie, and hello, everyone. Hopefully, we'll have a fairly good interactive session this evening, this afternoon, around this topic of tendon injuries in triathlon. Obviously, I'll go through a presentation of circa 35 minutes, put my stopwatch on to keep me honest. I'll bring it up on the screen in a moment, and then we'll have some question and answer time. Obviously, questions have already come through. And for me, a win would be that people leave this session, those attending, with a bit more awareness around some of the key principles relating to tendon rehab. So let's have a look. I'll pull up my slides. Slideshow. Here we go. Is that okay there, Robbie? Everyone? Can't see that yet? Hold on. Share screen. Here we go. This should work. Now, how's that there, guys?
That's perfect. Yep.
All right. Got it. Easy. So, gang, tendons is our topic. And when you work with endurance athletes, you're working with tendons and bones primarily. Of course, there's joints and muscles. Obviously, I presented in the past on bone stress injuries. I only ever had two careers in mind, triathlon or physiotherapy. I've had some fun experiences in the last 14 years as a physio, now a sports titled physio, working alongside triathletes and runners, do some work consulting when they're in Australia with the British tri team, Triathlon New Zealand, Athletics New Zealand, and get to head up the physio department for Super League Triathlon. So lots of time around triathlon. This is a slide from last presentation. I'm afraid that if I give up running, I'll have to replace it with murder now. Not making any light of that crime, but certainly in the world we've all been finding ourselves in, there's nothing more refreshing than being able to get out and clear the head with a run. So we don't want tendons to hold us back. Just a couple of key tips around tendons, and I don't want to get bogged too far down in the science. We want to keep this more interactive. More common sense in terms of the material. But this is a really key point. And pathophysiology just means the process of developing a tendon injury. We'll look at where we get tendon pain in a moment, but some people can be a little confused about the terminology. And most people will have seen this term at some point, likely, tendinopathy. And all it is, it's the contemporary term for what used to be referred as tendinitis. Tendinitis got dropped as the science started to reveal that inflammation around the cells wasn't as big of a component as it was once believed. So the current terminology is a tendinosis or a tendinopathy if it's in the clinic. So you'll often see on a report tendinosis. If it's picked up in a clinic, it'll be referred to as a tendinopathy. They are the same thing, but we have moved away from tendinitis. And then within this terminology, you've then got two types. You've got either a stable tendinopathy or an irritable tendinopathy. It's fairly self-evident that an irritable one will be a bit more ticked off than a stable one. And we'll come back to that with the rehab. All right, let's get to move across to the next slide. This is a very, simplistic view of the difference between a healthy tendon and a tendon that has a tendinopathy, or basically a sad face over here, a cranky tendon and a happy tendon. Just look here. Basically, there's disorganization of the fibers, if you like, of the tendon. The collagen gets disrupted. There's an ingrowth of nerves and blood vessels, and there's an increase in what's called ground substance in amongst the cells. So basically, this tendon on the right isn't happy. It'll be sore, and it's not doing the normal job that it has to do. Now, tendinopathy, where does it happen for triathletes? Where does it present? This is a slide just depicting the common regions. Now, some people on the webinar will have had or be possibly experiencing one of these tendon issues at the moment. Let's go through them. We've got the hamstring tendon. It's called the proximal hamstring tendon. Just put a couple of bullet points together here that outlines what you might expect with this. If you're suffering, you might have pain with sitting. You'll often have pain if you get off your TT bike. You'll have pain running fast often, or doing hills, for example, pain with squatting. The Achilles tendon is a major running injury or triathlon injury. Once again, a lot of people listening in will have dealt with this or know someone that has, or possibly be dealing with it at the moment. This can be either the insertion, so where the heel bone inserts into the tendon, or it can be more the mid portion further up. How does this present? Soreness after running, for example. Running faster might stir it up more. People will have pain hopping. And here's a little bit of some of the statistics around the prevalence of it and the incidence. 40 to 50% of runners will experience it across their running life, with 1 in 20 experiencing it in any annual year. So that's number 2. Number 3, the gluteal tendon. So this is the tendon on the side of our hip. So overlying the top of the hip here. There's 2 parts to it, the glute medius and glute minimus. It's a big, thick tendon. And it presents with pain with sitting on the lateral aspect of the hip, pain when people stretch it, when they get a bit sore here, they try and take their leg off and across their body. It tends to irritate it. Just like the Achilles and the hamstring, it'll get sore with running often. Faster work will tend to aggravate it more. And a lot of the times there's a bursa involved in this as well. And sometimes the bursa gets demonized when it's actually the tendon, and the tendon gets forgotten. The patellar tendon down here, it's underneath the kneecap. It's not a common running tendinopathy. It's more seen in jumping sports, so it's nickname, if you like, or colloquially is referred to as jumper's knee. You do see it, though, in some triathletes, and I think it's more driven by sometimes the cycling mechanics. So it's pain around the patellar tendon underneath the kneecap. And then down here in the white box, these are less common tendinopathies: peroneals on the outside of the leg, tib post on the inside of the shin, and flexor hallucis longus inside of the shin and under the foot. But definitely the ones in the yellow boxes are the ones that we'll often deal with. Now, I should say, as masters athletes, for masters athletes 35 plus, we are much more prone to soft tissue injuries, including tendon problems, than the younger age brackets, who tend to deal with often more bone stress injuries and joint-related pain. What causes tendinopathy? This is really straightforward. Tendinopathy, which remember is just an overuse injury to a tendon, used to be referred to as tendonitis, but we don't use those words anymore. It is due to an overload of the tendon, and it's when the load exceeds the capacity of the tendon. Now, that sounds a bit technical, but think of it this way. I've put a picture up in the corner there of 2 hands. And this is from the work of Jill Cook and via Ebony Rio, who are researchers, world regarded, out of Melbourne. If we get 2 hands and we lay one on top of the other, at all points, we need, if the top hand is our tendon's capacity. And what do we mean by capacity? We mean its ability to do its job. Its job is to store energy and release it. We'll look at it in a moment on some videos. The ability of the tendon has to always be higher than the demands of our training. Now, typically as athletes, we're always trying to increase the demand of our training. If the hand exceeds the capacity's hand, then we're in trouble. We're going to get some symptoms. So the capacity always needs to be greater than the training load. And when that doesn't happen, that's when we get sore. Now, we've all made training errors, and we will all probably continue to make training errors. It's reported that 60% of all running injuries is due to a training error. And what's a training error? Too much, too soon, too fast, not enough rest, etc. And Ebony Rio, I've popped it in the bottom here underneath Hayden Wild running there. She has this little quote, and I think it's great. Tendons like to get out of bed and do the same thing. So when someone presents, or perhaps you're struggling with a sore tendon, and you reflect on your training history, it's likely that there's been some change in the training history. So it might be that you've added 30K a week to your running, or that your volume stayed the same, but the intensity's gone up, or you've started to add hill work. Whatever it is, there's normally some change on the running side of it if we're talking about these lower limb tendons. Just a note here, this sort of outlines the part of the causation around when the capacity gets exceeded. So let's not forget, and we can see it down the bottom here, that the muscles, the red bits, hook into the gray bits there, the tendon. And that bottom slide, courtesy of Rich Willey, US-based running researcher from the Montana University, you can see the young runner on the left and the master's runner. As we mature, we get less calf strength and we get a longer, more elongated tendon, which leaves us susceptible to a tendon injury of the Achilles in this case. And if we look above that at the forces that we generate when we run as a multiple of body weight, where does most of the force generation come from? It comes from below the knee. Have a look at soleus there. 6.5 to 8 times body weight. It's the hardest working muscle outside of the hamstring in the running body. And yet a lot of the times we'll focus on hip strength, yet we forget to really work on the calf, which is made up of the deep part, the soleus and the gastrocs. Just a note on, training loads and recovery. This is taken from the literature. This study looked at circa 450 female and male endurance athletes over 12 months. And interestingly, the athletes with less than 2 days of rest per week, they had a 520% increased risk for an overuse injury. So this certainly feeds into tendinopathy. And the athletes who reported a tendon injury were on average 2 years older, 20 years plus, that's a typo there. So recovery really matters. And I see a lot of triathletes run into trouble when they are trying to build their running volume up or increase the intensity, or they've come from a period of time off due to an injury, another injury, or the off season, and they get back running into the tendon. Remember, they like to get out of bed and do the same thing each day, each week, each day. If the runner, the athlete's gone from 50 Ks a week of running to 70 Ks, from 0 Ks over 4 weeks off to 50 Ks a week, even though the normal volume might be 70, that 50 K a week might put the tendon into a relative overload. This is Shona Halson's quote, recovery scientist from the Australian Institute of Sport. And I think it's worth mentioning here regarding tendinopathy, the only training that we're benefiting from is the training we are recovering from. So if we've done a hard run session, let's think about when we structure the next hard run session, if we're trying to minimize the risk of injuries, including tendon problems. How does a tendon present? Well, these are the key points to look for. The first one here is it's load-dependent pain. Now, what does that mean? Let's actually go back a step. Why does this even matter? It matters because you don't want to be treated like you've got a tendinopathy if you don't. That's a surefire recipe for frustration and more time out than you need, and potentially a lot of expense along the way in trying to get it right. So there are other things that can present in areas like we looked at the hamstring, for example. You can have the sciatic nerve cause that one. You can have bone stress in that area. Not super common, but it can happen. In the Achilles, there's 9 differential diagnoses around the Achilles. So we want to make sure that if you're presenting with pain, say in this case, we're looking at, this is the back of Johnny Brownlee's leg here. If Johnny's presenting with soreness here, that it is the Achilles that we're treating. And it's easy to detect because if this is the problem, this is how it will present. Load-dependent pain. That means that if you do a double leg calf raise, you might feel some pain in the tendon. If you do a single leg calf raise, you might feel more pain in the tendon. If you're then asked to do a double leg jump, so you jump up and down both feet, you feel more pain again. And then if you do a single leg jump, guess what? You'll feel even more pain again. So it's load dependent pain. As the load or the demand on the tendon increases, so too does the pain of the athlete. Tendinopathy or tendon injuries will present in a way that there's pain after the activity and 24 hours later. It presents in a way that it warms up. So anyone that suffered it knows this. If your Achilles is stiff and sore getting out of bed, you get going for that morning run, you feel pretty yuck maybe for the first K or 2, and then it warms up. It's called the warm-up effect of the tendon. Scientifically, they don't know exactly why, but this happens. So we listen for that in your history. And the final thing here is there's often 1 point tenderness when someone's asked to point to where they're sore. So the gentleman who I just consulted with before I jumped on this webinar, he's a really handy marathon runner, 2:30 runner. And this gentleman's got pain on the outside of his Achilles tendon in a very specific area. Whereas something like the sheath of the tendon will be a bit more widespread in its locality. This is actually the 230 runner that I just mentioned. This is what happens when we develop a tendinopathy. Now, this is a case of Achilles tendinopathy. And I want you to see if you can pick which side is the affected side. So here we go. Sorry, it's not exactly in sync. Slow-mo. So the tendon's job is to hit the ground and the Achilles absorb the energy and then release it like a spring. And when the tendon's affected, here you can see the athlete's right side is the affected side. That tendon is not absorbing the forces as well. It doesn't look smooth. It's limited by pain. Whereas over here, there's that absorption of the energy and bang, the release of the energy. So when the tendon gets sore, it loses its ability to act like a spring. And we need to restore that through rehabilitation, which is what we're up to now. We're tracking well here, guys, for time. A few more slides on rehab, and then we'll throw it open for a really interactive discussion. Sorry, this is a busy slide. I tried to simplify it last night, but it's pretty useful, I think, in terms of info. So I struggled to chop anything out. One of the things we want to avoid is thinking that we need to use a sore tendon less. So when your tendon's sore, we need to find a way as therapists and coaches and people assisting you to keep you running. So sometimes we need to enforce a complete stop because that tendon, remember that word irritable, is just so irritable that you need to get off for maybe a week or 2 weeks. But where sometimes athletes go wrong is they'll take 6 weeks off to let a really cranky tendon settle, and it might feel better. But what's the problem on return to activity? Remember, tendons don't like sudden changes. If you go from no running to 30K running, even though your normal volume might be, say, 70 or 50, that's a big change, and you're likely to flare the tendon again. So we've got to make sure you keep using the tendon. We tend to advise things like keep running, but get rid of speed, halve the volume, things like that. As we do the rehab, we want to focus on the function and not the pain. Pain's a terrible indicator of how people are going. It's a good indicator early on as we try and settle it down, but as it goes on and the athlete works to restore strength to the muscle that attaches to the tendon, you're going to have your ups and downs. And then over here on the right, these are the 3 keys. This is from Peter Malliaris, one of the Melbourne-based researchers. Peter's 3 keys, when I asked him on a podcast episode, what are they to encourage people dealing with a tendon? He said the program's got to be individualized. It's got to involve progressive load, which means if you give an exercise as week 1, you can't be doing the same exercise as week 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. It needs to get progressively indexed up, and there needs to be adherence to the program. This is Ebony, who I referenced before. This was a recent episode of the podcast, and the great team there at TriVic might be able to send out a link if you missed this and want to learn more about this topic. But this was the summary takeaways from Ebony's sharings. Tendons can get into trouble with 2 greater changes, which we've already touched on. Good rehab involves getting people strong, plus retraining the springs. We need to listen to our tendons after we've loaded them up to see how we respond. And we're listening for low-level pain 24 hours later. If it's high-level pain, then it's your body saying you've overdone it. In rehab, we need single leg exercises. And that's important because, as Ebony says, the sneaky muscles that are weak can hide. So when you're doing double leg, that is, when you're doing single, they're very clearly exposed. And there's no recipes. This is a graph I often use in the room on the right. And don't worry about the text up here, but look at the line. We talk about throwing your pain off a cliff, settling it down with a various array of strategies. And then over time, it tapers off. But that red bump or that circled bump is a flaring symptoms. And that is inevitable in good tendon rehab. And it doesn't mean you've gone back to square one. Think of it like a staircase, team. At the start, when you walk in with a sore tendon, the therapist will figure out what your tolerance point is. What can you do? Can you do 14 calf raises? And then we figure out where you want to get to. What's your required goal? What's your required capacity? You want to run the Hawaii Ironman triathlon? You want to do a 70.3, a standard distance or a sprint distance race. And then we reverse engineer the steps to get you there. It generally involves these phases of rehab: strength work, energy storage work. Remember, making the tendon act like a spring, and energy storage and release. It's a little infographic I put together a little while ago about 5 things to think about. Number 1, in rehab, deload the tendon, settle it down. Number 2, load the tendon progressively and heavily. Number 3, be patient. It's going to take time. It takes time. Number 4, work through the stages we just looked at. And number 5, monitor the symptoms every 24 hours. A couple of outputted social media posts with some quotes here. This one's important. It's important to understand, if we're talking about the Achilles, this is from Seth O'Neill, a researcher, that the calf and Achilles tendon are robust. They're able to withstand very large loads with daily function. The force within the tendons, 4 times body weight with walking and 6 times body weight with jogging or running. Gets higher as we go faster. And this quote I just love, I use it all the time. It's from a New York-based physio, Karen Litzy, who says a flare-up doesn't equal a freak-out. So when triathletes, runners panic because their tendons gotten sore, I always remind them of this. These are a couple of mistakes to avoid when rehabbing your tendon injury, whether it's hamstring, Achilles, gluteal, whichever tendon we may be dealing with. These mistakes are commonly made and they apply across all triathlon-based tendon injuries. Number 1, avoid stretching it. Took this photo in Beijing 18 months ago. Obviously, it's a bit of a treasure now because I don't think we're getting to Beijing anytime soon. But, if this lady had a hamstring tendon problem, this would be really agitating it, because it's what we call a compressive force on the tendon, and it tends to agitate already affected pathological tendons. So don't overstretch it. Same with the Achilles. Don't get into a calf stretch position. That will tend to aggravate it. Ebony Rio often jokes, the researcher I referenced before, stop poking it. Just leave it alone. What do we do as athletes? We want to test it. We want to see how it feels. So we stick our thumb on it and, wow, it's still sore today. It's like a bruise. When you do that, just stop poking it, leave it alone, and give it a chance to settle down. Be aware of relying on passive therapies. The only thing that restores a sore tendon in a triathlete is a progressive loading program, a progressive strengthening program. We'll look at a few exercises in a moment. Don't get suckered into thinking that more massage is going to fix that Achilles or whichever tendon, or acupuncture. These things are all well and good on their own, but when it comes to tendon rehab, they will not get it done. It's the same as shockwave. I just applied a dose of shockwave to my prior patient, but we're very clear this isn't going to restore the capacity to the affected tendon or the muscle that attaches to it. So the focus is on the gym work. Avoid resting too much. You need to keep loading it. Otherwise, there's a relative overload when you get back out there. And avoid not loading it enough. This is the number 1 reason tendinopathy rehab fails or people's progress stalls. This photo was taken through somewhere near COVID time, and this is a former really well-known triathlete. You can guess in the question time who it is, but he's trying to rehabilitate his Achilles and had to get the kids on a trailer to do some seated calf raise without the gym. And another mistake is introducing speed work too soon at the bottom of the slide there. Put that one together a little while ago, 5 things to avoid because these mistakes are so commonly made. This courtesy for this slide, I'm not sure who I can credit on this, but it was, I know Ebony Rio has used it in her presentation and she struggled to credit it as well. It's come out of a research paper somewhere. So if it's yours, thank you. We've got to find the green zone, guys, girls, when we're rehabbing a tendon. So if we sit on the couch, we're in trouble. If we did 1,000 kilometers in the week of running, I know that's a silly example, we're in trouble. But the aim of the sweet zone, if you like, is we increase the ceiling on this, and we do that through strength training. This is probably important, going back a slide. Frequently asked tendon questions. Is cortisone bad? It's not ideal. Cortisone has been shown to have a negative effect on tendon health. So it can help with pain relief, but it's a short-term win, and you're no better off in the long term. Why does it seem to warm up? We don't know, but it does. Can I get shockwave? Is that all to fix it? No, you got to do the loading program. Is the bump on the tendon bad? No, it's actually a favorable adaptation of the sore tendon. So don't worry if you've got a bumpy Achilles tendon. And really big one here is, am I at risk of rupturing because you've got a sore tendon? No. People that rupture, for example, Achilles tendons, they do not typically have pain in the lead up. So if you've got a sore Achilles, you can sit and smile because you're probably not going to rupture that Achilles. Skipping forwards here, there are many exercises we can do for each of the different tendons, and it's got to be individualized. But this looks a bit odd, I know. This is a cricket player who, alongside his sore Achilles tendon, he had a big knee injury at a Bucks party. It wasn't his fault. Got tackled, but so that's why he's in a brace. But we're doing some Smith rack stuff here, home stuff here, and gym stuff here. This is hamstring based stuff, pulling a band to the bottom, leveraging off something. This is pretty, one on the left's pretty full on. It's a hamstring tap on a chair. Patellar tendon, we'll be doing leg extension, leg press, leg extension, and Spanish squats, for example. These two gentlemen, this gentleman had a ruptured Achilles tendon, a pro rugby union player, and this gentleman is the 800-meter Australian record holder who also had a sore tendon. So sore tendons do not discriminate. The use of drills, there's a picture I grabbed in February from Ethiopia, but drills can be really useful with our running to assist with training the tendons to do their job. This is going to be fairly heavy lifting, and I might really quickly gloss over this just so we can throw to question and answers. But this is from a presentation I give to physiotherapists about the different diagnosis around the back of the ankle. And the point here is not to confuse anyone or to cause concern, but these are all the different things, 1, 2, 3, 4, that can give people pain here. And there's more, 5, 6, 7, 8, going back. So 8. And this is like bony impingement. And we go right back to a common differential diagnosis of the Achilles, which is a tendon sheath that can get inflamed. Now, the point is that you've got to know what you're dealing with if you want a successful rehab. Otherwise, you're on the wrong track from day one, and it's going to be a frustrating journey. Let's skip across here and let's do some Q&A and really get interactive. So, Robbie, over to you, mate, if you want to invite some questions.
Yeah, I think, should we start off with the questions which are in the chat at the beginning? There's one from Dave in regards to rehab and strengthening exercises to prevent ankle tendonitis. Second time he's had to stop running due to this issue in both ankles. That's sorry to hear that, Dave.
Okay. So Dave, and that was that, Robbie, was that Achilles tendon?
He's just put ankle tendonitis. So there's from that last slide, there's pain which could be from a number of different places. So perhaps, Dave, would you like to unmute yourself and just expand a little bit on your question?
Oh, yes. I'm new to the sport. I guess just started running and ran my first marathon, or attempted my first marathon last year. And during the train up phase, from basically sitting at a desk, so increased the volume quite dramatically. But I guess it's the tendon that goes around the ankle on the inside, on below the bone, around the bottom of the bone ball, and I guess on the other side as well, and basically in both legs. When you've explained when I increase load, that's when I'm sort of getting this issue. I guess it's a strength issue and also a volume issue.
Yeah, spot on. And Dave, if we do the two hands here, the top hand, which is the capacity or the strength of the muscle and the capacity of the tendon, it has to sit above your volume. And if you were prepping for your marathon, as you indicated, your volume, your training load, I should say, not just volume, your training loads were increasing, and at some point you surpass the capacity of the tendon, right? So we now need to restore that balance where the capacity is greater than the demands. So stripping back from your volume, your training loads to a degree, which you've probably done, is key. And then the strength work is the real key, but it's that progressive load-in program. As likely a master's athlete, a fellow master's athlete, 35 plus, it's all about that calf strength, which is the standing calf work and the seated calf work. And as we looked at there, Dave, the force generated out of those is enormous. So it's not enough for us to typically just do calf raises at home in our bedroom or lounge room. We do need to get into a gym with a prescriptive program to do some key exercises to restore the capacity to that area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think what you sort of alluded to, what I've done is just stayed home and rested, and I think that's probably a mistake after attending this event. Yeah, so
yeah,
it's pretty good.
And it's common, it's makes sense, doesn't it? Let's just rest it. But it's a trap because then as you've outlined, you get this recurrence when you get back into it, and it can be quite bewildering because you look back at the weeks you had off and you're like, gosh, I've sat on the sideline and it was settled when I wasn't running, but now I'm back running and it's flared up again. That sounds like that's what's happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly what's happened.
So the combination of some home exercises and some gym-based loading will be the key. It doesn't have to take you 2 hours every day to work through this. It's got to be really time efficient, but there's no substitute for, unfortunately, having to get it done. But here's the flip side. When you restore that strength to the calf, the Achilles function, it should help you run better, given that 50% of propulsion comes from below the knee. And this webinar, the scope's probably not there I might flick back if I can on slides, but some of the key exercises will be things like, sorry, I went too far. Standing calf work. So here, so Nick's got his knee bent because he had the knee in the brace, but coming up and down with weight on your back. Yep. And there's benchmarks for all this. So we'd say this is in time got to be about 0.3 to 0.4 times your body weight, the weight on this total. And you're going up slowly, down slowly. It's good to use a metronome, Dave, which is a beeper on your phone. You can get free apps for this. Yep. And that stimulus, audible beep, helps keep your pacing right. And we want it to be slow. It's heavy loading, but it's slow loading. That's what the tendons tend to like. And then seated calf raises, this sort of thing back here, which James is demonstrating, where you've got the bar on the end of your thigh and you'd be doing this single leg coming up and down. And then at home, you need to be able to do 2 second up, 2 second down calf raises really slow. And ideally, with good form, getting to 25 calf raises.
Yep.
So I hope that helps. If you get stuck, just reach out on social. I can direct you a little bit more. So I hope that helps, mate.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks.
Easy, mate. Have a good rest of the day.
No worries. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
So I'm going to skip to one of the questions we had come in on the registration forms. And this one is in relation to returning to swimming after delamination of common extensor tendon, lateral epicondylitis. And they've put sculls, paddles, or just swim in question marks. Sculls,
paddles, or swim. Yeah. Great question. Very specific one. And this is an upper limb tendinopathy. Tendinopathy. This is an upper limb tendon injury as opposed to the lower limb where we primarily focused on those few slides. So the principles here are the same. The athlete's getting back in the water, getting back to swimming. So the training loads are about to go up in terms of swimming. The injury, which has been significant, delamination. Was there surgery involved, Robbie? Is that what the question said?
Just need to go back and find the question.
Sorry, mate. I think there was. So there's been the training loads are going up here and the capacity's gone down. So as we have to take time off due to surgery or an injury, we drop in capacity. So as the swimmer gets going again, this is happening. Now, to use sculls, pool, or just to swim, my suggestion would be minimize the load initially on the elbow as much as possible. So I wouldn't be swimming with any aids. I wouldn't be swimming with any hand paddles. A pull buoy would potentially deload a little bit. Some people, depending on their buoyancy, find pull buoys to be more work. Others find it to be less work. So you'd have to figure out which sort of swimmer you are. But definitely trying to find a way in so that you can get out of the pool and not be flared up at the elbow. That's the big test. If you flare up after being in the pool, then it means you've overdone it. You're outside of that green belt, that safe loading zone, if you like. And it could be that you've started at a kilometre and your tendons tolerance was more like 750 meters. So specifically, I would just swim plus or minus a pool buoy, but hand paddles will definitely come down the track. And the whole thing's dependent on a good progressive loading program, which will increase the strength of which is really the tennis elbow, if you like, the common extensor tendons there. So that would be things like some slow curls, and I'm sure you've got a good team around you there, building up to some dumbbell hammers and all sorts of different exercises. So keep at it and you'll get there.
Great stuff. So we've got a number of our parents of junior athletes on the webinar this evening, which is fantastic. And one of them was curious to understand if there's any differences between youth and junior tendons and adult tendons. Yeah,
it's a brilliant question, Robbie. And certainly it's probably a bit beyond the scope of the slides. You're not trying to put everyone to sleep with an end of the day slideshow that was too long. So there is and there isn't a difference. A junior athlete obviously has a developing body. Their bones are growing in length. Bones are maturing. Everything's maturing. So that often rapid extension or excursion of the bone in terms of growth in a junior athlete can put more load at the attached onto the attaching tendon, which is struggling to keep pace, if you like, with that change of the bone's length. So you do see a lot of tendon presentations, as any parent of junior athletes will attest. You see the Achilles tendon, it's often referred to as severs in junior athletes. The patellar tendon, often referred to as Osgood-Schlatter's. You don't often see the hamstring tendon in junior athletes. It tends to be more of a master's athlete tendon problem. And the gluteal tendon does certainly tend to happen more around the middle years as well. So primarily we'd be talking about the knee tendon, if you like, or specifically the patellar tendon underneath the kneecap and the Achilles tendon. What ticks them off, what makes them sore, it's the same as an adult. So this is where the similarities exist. It's a sudden increase in loading or the demands that exceed the tendon's capacity. So the junior athlete starts adding soccer training in as well as the running training. Or they start doing speed work on Tuesdays and again on Thursdays. So it's an overload of that tendon. That's what causes it. It's the same as an adult. It's the same way to rehabilitate it. We've got to devise a loading program to strengthen that area up again, whilst also advising around appropriate training loads to not stir that tendon up too much. There's also, interestingly, some science around things like the patellar tendon, in that area is basically maturing from underneath outwards over a period of about 2 or 3 years. So that's when it's most susceptible to getting triggered with pain or ticked off, if you like, with, you know, a junior triathlete, for example, adding basketball into the week on that injury. So I hope that gives a little bit of an idea. It's pretty much treated the same. There's just a few nuances, terminology aside. It's the same causation as well.
Fabulous. So just moving on from that slightly, if someone was out running and they started to feel tendon pain, they haven't said where that tendon pain is, but if they started to feel tendon pain during a run, what's better to do? Reduce the pace or the distance?
Yeah, great question. These are all good questions. It could be both, but generally I'd say and we know, right? So that we were talking about tendinopathies in that slideshow before, but we can also throw into that mix because it's the same. It's an overuse injury to a tendon tears. And that sounds so drastic, like they're hanging in half, but it's not, it's rarely the case. It's more of a split into the belly, if you like, of the tendon of some magnitude. So if that happens, we know about it because we'll be running along and we'll be like, oh, geez, that doesn't feel good on my Achilles, or that doesn't feel good on my hamstring tendon. And Robbie, in those instances, if the pain, say, greater than like our 5 out of 10, the athlete would be better to not run on and stir it up, just to walk it on home. If it was a speed session and there was the ability to continue to do a few reps, or a fartlek and you just had to get home because you're halfway from your house to wherever, then taking the speed out of it is always a good principle. Speed is the enemy of an unhappy tendon. And as I mentioned, it's a key mistake people make in rehabbing is they go too hard with speed work far too early. It's all about restoring the volume. So the answer could be both, Robbie. Long answer, I know.
Okay, so we've had a number of questions coming around the calf, dealing with scar tissue, and then we've got a number down at the bottom of the chat looking at how do you build up to 3 to 4 times body weight, how often or times a day, how many reps sets should I aim for with 2 sets of calf raises. So there's a number of people who seem to be struggling with calf issues. So what should we be looking at there in particular?
Yeah, I'll go through a few principles, and I do appreciate that, you know, this is general sort of advice. It's not individualized to everyone's exact circumstances, but the reason this can hopefully be useful is because the principles are immutable. They do not change. It's just the individual context needs to be tweaked. I just jotted down a few things that you shared there, Robbie, that jumped out. So how do you build up to 3 to 4 times body weight, or those high forces that we looked at, whether that's the muscle force or the forces in the tendon like we had on that slide? The good news is you don't have to get to be on par with those forces. That's just what the human body can produce and does produce, but we need to get it somewhere towards that. So, for example, the soleus, which we're looking at here on this slide with James sitting in a bent knee position. So a bent knee position hits the soleus, the deep muscle underneath the almonds, the gastrocs. We know that, you know, as a benchmark, an athlete it'd be great to have them be able to put 1 to 1.5 times their body weight in load on this bar, including the bar, that is. So if James, just for ease, was say 80 kilos, in time, he'd have at least 80 kilos on here and possibly 100 kilos plus in order to get hypothetical sore Achilles tendon. Although his tendon wouldn't get sore, James has got some flamingo socks on there. They're probably protective. But if James had a sore Achilles, so we know the loads need to get heavy, but they don't need to get up to 8 times body weight. We just can't produce that. So hopefully that clears that up. The next one was, you know, how many times a day, etc. It's all about getting momentum. So if you've got a really upset sore tendon and you're an athlete, obviously, you know, people listening tonight are either working in the field or are athletes. We want to get back out there as soon as possible. So I normally talk around trying to help people get momentum. So I might prescribe, if we just go on this theme of an Achilles tendon injury, daily, a set of 2 or 3 daily exercises to get done at least once a day. But if it was an athlete racing a timeline, or, you know, really wanting to get out there as soon as possible or improve their situation, it might be doing some holding, some isometric holds up on the toes a couple of times a day. And the reps and sets, some principles around that. If it's home-based stuff, it's often higher-based reps. If it's in the gym, it's often lower reps. It might be 4 to 6 reps of a particular exercises. 5 to 8 reps of a particular exercise, 3 to 4 sets of that, because we're trying to go into these heavy loads. doing high reps, low weights in the gym will not get a tendon restored to its capacity that it needs. That were the main things that jumped out there. Robbie, is there anything that we missed?
Just with that last bit, Andrew, who was asking about the number of reps and sets, is just asking whether that's a single leg or both legs.
The single leg, Andrew. So when we're rehabbing or working through a tendon rehabilitation process, single leg work is definitely where we need to and want to start, because you really quickly see, if it's, say, your right side that's got the injury, you typically see just how weak you are on the right side compared to your left. Whereas if you did double leg calf raises, the right's going to be compensated for by the left. And if we think about something like the hamstring tendon, which is, I don't have incidence and prevalence statistics around that to say how common it is, but crikey, it's one of the most common injuries I see in long course triathletes is that proximal hamstring tendon. And as an example, how weak we often are as triathletes or endurance athletes, to get a hamstring right, the clinical benchmark, which has been a spouse which I work to from Peter Maliaris, is an athlete laying on their tummy in a hamstring curl position. So I'll jump over here. Oops. Being able to do 0.3 times their body weight. And when you ask most runners or triathletes to do this, I actually didn't have it in the slide here, but if you can imagine this is in a machine at the gym and you're doing hamstring curls, if you're a, let's go for numbers, 70 kilo athlete, you need to be able to, in time, be able to curl 21 kilos or somewhere in vicinity of that of weight slowly with control, heel towards your bottom, doing, say, 8 reps. And most triathletes with a sore tendon here will struggle to do 5 kilos. So they're normally way, way, way down in this muscle strength, which is affecting the attached tendon. So I hope that sheds a little bit more light as well, Robbie.
Brilliant, Brad. Thank you. So there's a number of particularly precise questions coming in around hamstrings. So there was someone who's had an ACL injury in the past, and is now getting a generic pain around the knee. The tendons around there continuing to hurt even years after the ACL injury. So I'm wondering if that's a common issue. And we've also had someone ask in relation to hamstring surgery, where they've had all 3 tendons reconnected back to the ischial tuberosity. And I've had a number of, I'm not even going to try and read all of this out. There's a number of different tendinopathies. Is now on a week 8 of a return to run program. So asking whether it's just their tendons, or is there something they can do to get back to full fitness? Because they've been doing tendon exercises for about 2 years now, they state.
Yes. So the ACL example and then the surgery example, they kind of morph together. So you've done well there, Robbie, to sort of bring those together. And I can categorically say, because the principles apply, if the athlete with the ACL history is still having some troubles in that hamstring tendon, proximal hamstring tendon, then it's still a load versus capacity issue. So just say that athlete's running 20K a week and just hypothetically biking 100K a week. If that's problematic, then it means that the hamstring strength and the associated tendon obviously isn't dealing with that loading. So we need to get the strength up. Now, with an ACL reconstruction, I presume it was an ACL repair, typically they're done with the hamstring tendon. So there's most likely been a deficit in hamstring function off the back injury and the associated surgery and recovery. There's benchmarks for how strong the hamstrings need to be, as I mentioned. There's other ways to assess and benchmark hamstring strength. In the clinic here, we use a Nord board, which is made by Valve Performance, and you hook in and you drop down in a Nordic hamstring curl, and you can easily see what your force is like in newtons on your left compared to your right. And we use your recovery to make sure no one's left at the end of a recovery with a deficit in hamstring strength. So I dare say there's an element of that, without doubt, that's fed into the athlete currently experiencing the hamstring tendinopathy. And as a little test, I'd encourage the athlete to get into a gym, go and find one that's got a prone hamstring curl machine, and see with control what weight you can shift heel to bottom. And if you struggle with 5 kilos, then there's the medicine. You need to get from 5 towards 15 to 20 plus, depending on your stature, your body weight. And it's only exercise work that will get it there. But the number one thing that most people do is they haven't been loaded enough, and that's why they get stuck. And that sort of absolutely feeds into the surgery for the tendons as well, and the associated tendinopathies. And if you're in that situation, and we don't know all the tendinopathies, we just know there's been a few, you would start to wonder if it's your tendons. Perhaps, you start to question if you've got deficient tendons. There are certainly some rare instances of associated conditions such as psoriatic arthritis, where people might be predisposed to tendinopathies. But leaving those aside, which an astute therapist should be able to walk someone through, you're still left with the capacity and load phenomena. So if there's persistent symptoms, I'd encourage that individual to get benchmarked to find out locally for each of those areas. Say it was Achilles, what's the calf function like? And not just if it's good, let's get some numbers on a page. Let's get you in a gym and test you. Let's find out what that hamstring strength's like. Let's find out what the hip abductor strength's like if it's the gluteal tendon. So in speaking with, and Robbie, I'll send you through links in an email if people want this disseminated, but Peter Maliaris, tendon researcher, world acclaimed. And I recall on the podcast recording an episode with Peter, asking Peter, for the benefit of the listenership, what do you do when you're stuck in a tendon rehabilitation process and you feel like you're not making progress? And Peter said the first thing we want to do is change gears and look for the next magic cure. Unfortunately, there is none when it comes to tendons. It is a loading program that's often boring, it's slow, and takes time and energy. And no one wants that as athletes. We'd much prefer to lay on a table and have someone hopefully magically fix us with an elbow. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for tendons.
So we've had a question come in from Scott, who's asking, would the ISO holds give you an analgesic effect? And would you advocate doing your loaded isometrics pre-run? Which then I think sort of leads into Emma's question of saying, from a progression point of view, I guess, is there any benefit to doing dynamic and plyometric exercises in the gym?
Brilliant stuff, Emma and Scott. Scott, yes, the isometrics do give you that, or they are thought to give you that that analgesic effect, that pain relieving effect. The key criteria there is, though, it does need to be heavy. So you're looking at 70% maximum voluntary contraction to elicit that analgesia. So, you're looking at some decent load. You're normally needing to hold minimum, your trackside, so to speak, about to go for a runner at the front of your house, and you go up and do some isometric toe heel holds. Yes, it's potentially going to help. It's certainly not going to hurt, but at best, the isometrics are analgesic inducing, and they still don't restore the energy capacity of the tendon, which only comes through working the muscle with heavy, slow resistance. And then it leads into Emma's question around dynamic or plyometric-based exercise work, which we think about that, it's like an Achilles tendon that's doing some hopping work. So we might start an athlete at the right time doing some double leg hops. Then we might go into some some double leg forward hops, for example, some single leg hops, some single leg forward hops, hopping off a step, bouncing up. So you're training that tendon to restore its energy storage ability, or return to being like a good spring, which it loses that capacity when it's been affected. So yes, Emma, you definitely need to be retraining the spring. You've got to get creative with some of these other tendons like the hamstring and the gluteal tendon, but there's ways to do it. And let's not forget that running is a plyometric activity. It's one leg to the next. And so that's where we've got to have enough strength in the body to absorb, allow for that return to running, or that increase in running loads. So it's marrying all that up. So good questions from Emma and Scott. Final question. I'm conscious of time and getting you back to your family, Brad. So final question is, I think Paula has asked in the chat, and also it's come in on the registration forms as well. And that's just talking around collagen supplementation. So what are your thoughts on collagen supplementation for repair and recovery? Yeah, thanks, Robbie. Good question, Paula. Yeah, my thoughts are pretty straightforward. I've asked sports-based dietitians around this, and there's a mixed response. Some advocate for collagen-based supplementation, and others are less positive about it. But if we think of it through a filter of, can it do any harm? No, it can't. So if you've got access to it and means to it, then by all means. But what we know is tendinopathies, overuse injuries, training loads have exceeded the tendon's capacity. So anything orally ingested, such as the supplementation, Paula, it won't do anything to restore the energy storage capacity of the tendon. Only a loading program that's progressive will do that through exercise work. But it may potentially have some effect positively at a cellular level. I personally, if I was rehabbing a tendon, wouldn't over-index on those things, but I'd definitely be getting myself into a gym. But of course, it's not going to do any harm. So if you've got something and you can use it, by all means, go for it, Paula. And I should say it's outside of my defined scope of practice as a sports physio. So they're my comments as a sports physio, obviously not as a trained sports dietitian.
Fantastic. There's a question from Stuart just around the Alfredson protocol for Achilles tendinopathy. We've done an awful lot on Achilles, but just as a quick one, what's your opinion on the Alfredson protocol?
Yeah, and we have done a bit on, spoken about Achilles a bit, but it is the predominant tendinopathy for triathletes. The Alfredson protocol was used for many years as the exercise protocol of choice for Achilles tendinopathies or tendon injuries. And it has some merit in the literature, but it's not necessarily any better than isotonics, where you come up and down, not just focusing on the down component. So I don't tend to prescribe Alfredson stuff. I did when I graduated 14 years ago. And most of the contemporary practitioners will be giving more of the isotonic, the ups and the downs, not just the eccentric phase, which is characteristic of Alfredson. So nothing wrong with it, but there are arguably, I'm not sure of the exact papers to reference here, but certainly clinically, it's more about the ups and the downs, not just the eccentric phase now.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Brad. And I just want to thank you again for giving your time to us this evening. Once again, it's been terrific, and there's a terrific response from people registering to attend, and just as many hanging on for the recording who wanted to listen this evening but weren't able to attend live. So really popular. For all those who are here, you can get an awful lot more information and hear some great bits and pieces on Brad's podcast, the Physical Performance Show. I was listening to the episode this evening, this afternoon with this is a difficult name, Darren Finn.
Oh, it is a difficult, yeah. Darren, you had to coach me on saying it at the start, Robbie, but it's Darren Finn. Yeah, it's a mouthful. Did you enjoy it?
Oh, absolutely terrific. For those who aren't aware, it's the author of Running with the Kenyans book, among a number of others.
He's on the desk.
But yeah, absolutely terrific listen, as are many of the other podcasts that you've done. So if you want to know more, jump on and have a look at those podcasts, and we'll get the specific links to the ones that you mentioned up on the website in due course as well.
I'll drop those over in an email, and always happy for direct questions as well. You can find me on Instagram quite easily, or on Facebook. There's the little handles there on the page, on the slide. But if you've got a question, guys, feel free to reach out, shoot it across. I'll shoot back something. And obviously, it helps on an individual level with a bit more context than a group discussion. But hopefully there was some key principles there that assist when you come across your next tendon concern. And thanks, Robbie, for the invite. Well done as well, Robbie and team. Like what you guys have been doing through the pandemic with Triathlon Victoria is absolutely outstanding. So thanks for the opportunity to be involved.